Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SCA's 45th monthly Zoom presentation. We are now more than halfway through our fourth year with no end in sight. Oh, let's see what's happening. My name is Emily Taggart-Stricker, and I'm the treasurer for the Society for Commercial Archaeology, and I will be your host tonight. We would like to welcome all of our guests and any new people we have with us. We're happy you took the time out of your evening to watch an SCA presentation. I hope you enjoy the show. And for anyone watching the recording of this episode of the SCA's monthly presentation who is not a member of the SCA, we earnestly ask you to consider joining. Funding for the various activities of the SCA comes almost exclusively from our membership. Just visit our website at sca-roadside.org and follow the links. Now, I have the pleasure of introducing tonight's presentation. Let's join Leslie Dottie Van Every for her talk entitled Our Own Paradise, History of Black-Owned American Resorts. You may have heard of the Green Book, a popular travel guide treasured by the Black community for its travel tips during Jim Crow. But have you heard of Black Eden, or Idlewild, or American Beach? These are some of the many Black resorts that were popular places many Americans spent their summer vacations. Leslie Dottie is a writer and lover of all things vintage, except vintage beliefs. Join us as she delves into the history of these resorts, featuring photos and stories from famous Black celebrities to journal entries from the lucky families who enjoyed these safe spaces. And I would now like to welcome Dottie and invite her to take the microphone.
Well, thank you so much, Emily. I really appreciate it. So I just want to dive right in because I want to go through all the awesome pictures and information. So let's begin because guess what? Okay, there we go. You know what? There is nothing more American, right, than going to a resort and taking advantage of the vacation, using the weekend. Because since the weekend's been invented, Americans have found ways to make the most of it, from camping to like going to the pool, going to the mountains to ski, and of course, the beach. And all of those pictures I just showed you were wonderful, but they kind of left out a different perspective. In fact, a large chunk of Americans who are people of color, and in particular for this piece, we're going to be looking at Black Americans and resorts. So why am I doing this? Because I wanted to highlight the beauty of the Black experience beyond the trauma that we so often highlight in the history, and instead really focus on a lot of the amazing joy that is such an incredible part of the Black American experience, as well as the American experience. It's really important to share these stories. And thank you so much for taking the time tonight to talk about them. So why am I sharing this? It's because I too have a Black parent. I have two Black parents actually. And what I'm going to do throughout this presentation is really bring in some of my own personal family stories, because so much of my own family history is really experienced through all of this. And this is a picture of my dad and me when I was very young, and he's probably like just so tired. But why? Just a little bit about my dad. And I think it's really important for us to highlight him. And the reason why is he was the first Black journalist or editor full-time at Newsweek in the I think it was late 50s, early 60s, which was a lot was going on there. And the reason why he did it, it was not an easy job. And I took this quote from his obituary, and it's a really powerful piece. It's basically saying, when I came along, I would get up in the morning and I would put on this armor and go to work. And this armor was basically his way of getting through all of the little microaggressions. It's like, 1,000 cuts that would just tear at his ego and his emotions. And this was not an unusual experience for many Black people during the 1960s to now. In It is reason why Black resorts really needed to exist. There's a place where they needed to be able to truly be able to be among their own people so they could let this armor down and really be able to relax. Right there. So, why Black resorts exist? Well, yeah, I kind of have to go all the way back to Jim Crow laws. I'm sure you guys are all familiar with Jim Crow laws because they weren't really a specific law, but more of Black codes, as it were. These were strict local and state laws that, had ways of keeping the formerly enslaved people down. Basically, it was a way of controlling them, stripping away voting rights, controlling where they lived and how they traveled. So all across the United States, there were signs like this. As you can see, White Beach, reserved for whites only. This was not an unusual experience in the South, actually, even in the North, believe it or not. They might not have had signs, but they did many things to make sure that that was not allowed. So across the United States, Black people were not welcome at beaches, hotels, or any facilities. So what did they do? They got around in different ways and they used this book. I'm sure. Thank you, Emily, for even mentioning it, because it's very rare that you can point to a book like the Green Book here and say that this book literally saved lives. This book was the difference between life and death. And you might have even seen the Green Book movie, which is somewhat overwrought and centers the white person. And it is not a movie that I would recommend, but it really brought a lot of people to know about the Green Book. And maybe you saw it referenced in this famous show, Lovecraft County, which we'll talk about later as well. For me, I first saw it in my grandparents, who are pictured here in their 1965 Volvo in as a kid would do, you would sort of scuttle around in the glove box for things or candy or treats or like a handkerchief. And I came across this book and I asked my grandfather, like, what is this? And he said it was a book that his friend who worked in the post office wrote. And I had no idea that that was actually Victor Hugo Green, who created the book in 1936. And was considered the way that Black people were allowed to really embrace the adventure of a road trip, just like their white counterparts. And Victor Green got the idea from a friend of his who was Jewish and who shared a book with him or showed him a book that listed places like the Catskills, which is very well known because of Mrs. Maisel, and these places in the Catskills where Jewish communities could go and relax. And Green thought to himself, this is the type of book that my people need. And so the result of that was the Negro Motorist Green Book. And it was popular for decades. So why, and this book, as I said before, really helped people, Black people, be able to commute from the North to the South and to go around and visit family. And you may have a question like, what were they doing? Why were they visiting? And a big part of that was because of the Great Migration. I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard of the Great Migration. It was a huge, one of the largest community shifts for Black people in the United States. Happened when Black Southerners moved up north to a lot of different towns because of when the war effort started in 1917. A lot of the able-bodied white men went off to Europe and they left these industrial and essential jobs vacant, which offered a lot better pay than than the sharecropping salaries that so many Black people down in the South were living off of. So it's not like they left all of their friends and families and never saw them again. No, they wanted to go back and visit during their breaks, during their vacations. And so using the Green Book, It was a very important part to help them get from the north to the south in one piece. Now, remember that, this was during a time of sundowner towns, where if you were a Black person who stayed there after dark, you were literally taking your lives into your own hands because you could be killed without issue just because of the color of your skin and that you were out after dark. And if anyone has watched Lovecraft County, I highly recommend it, the HBO scene. There's a really very intense scene where they talk about and highlight a sundown town in it. Um, Now, let me share a personal story here. This woman here is my mother. She is 80 plus years old. She is an absolute delight. Yes, she does look white. She's actually Native American and Black. And so, even though she looks white, she is of the heritage and grew up as Black and Native American. And although she might have looked very light skinned and could pass for white, her family members, all of them were in different colors. So my grandfather was part of the migration from the South in North Carolina to the North in New Jersey, where he opened up a shop. And once when my mother was very young, she was going to go down to North Carolina, where my grandmother had just given birth. And she went down in the South to return to be with family for her convalescence. And my grandfather could not leave, so he left his daughter, my mom, to be taken down by her uncle Freeman. And they didn't have a car, so they put them on the train. And as soon as they passed DC, all of the Black people were pulled off the train and told to sit in a different cargo train section. And my uncle Freeman was distressed because my mother looked white and she was told that she had to stay there. And when my uncle Freeman or her uncle Freeman was upset, said, "No, I need to pull them down." The conductor basically said to leave the white girl and backhanded my uncle Freeman and in front of my mother and all the other people on the train. And so my mother was left in the car, in the train car, with all these white people who saw her and knew that she was Black. And a grown man sitting across from her who was chewing tobacco actually spit on her. And my mother, since then, never enjoyed train rides. And that was the last time that, I mean, it was enough for my grandfather to buy a car and that rely on the Green Book to make sure that they were able to travel without, any shame involved, like such states. And please know that this is just one story of, I'm sure, many stories that many Black people and people of color have shared about traveling through the South. So a lot of people often ask who were going to these Black resorts. Well, the thing that people oftentimes forget is that even though there was prevalent racism happening since the start of the United States, there have been just as long communities of Black people who were making money and building strong communities and investing back into the Black community. Black cities have been around for 100 years and they will continue to, along with the Special Club. And these communities were very insular and they were incredibly important in early civil rights activism. Here we have some wonderful women who just graduated from Spelman College. And we also have the Lynx, an incredibly popular women's society. Another group to consider is also Sigma Pi Phi. Here they are at this phenomenal annual party called the Boule, which still happens today. And then my favorite, this is a picture of children together for Jack and Jill, which is a nationwide youth focus club. I personally am a third generation member of Jack and Jill. And you need to know that these are the communities that had enough money to go to any hotel or resort in the US. And there was a good chance that they would all have been turned away. And this is why the Black community invested in their own resorts, because it was a place not only where they could be accepted, but where they could be safe. So the first one, I'd like to take a closer look at these popular Black resort and resort towns. The first one is the oldest. And even though it says here that it was incorporated in 1922, it was actually founded in 1893. And who founded it? Oh, just this young couple here, Charles Douglas. You might have heard of his father, Frederick Douglass. Well, they were out one evening and were denied entry into the Bay Ridge Resort on Chesapeake Bay. And in response, Charles Douglas, entered the real estate development business and started purchasing beachfront property directly south of Bay Bridge. In fact, you could even see it from the Bay Bridge and from the Bay Ridge Resort. And he acquired more than about 40 acres for around $5,000 and started selling those parcels of lands to other Black friends and family. And the first one he built was this one called Twin Oaks. And he immediately brought down his father, Frederick Douglass. And where Frederick Douglass goes, I assure you, many other influential Black people go as well. And who were some of those people? Well, you have here Paul Robeson, Booker T. Washington, also Langston Hughes and Alex Haley all spent time in this wonderful community. And there was, as the population grew, it became officially a city, as it mentioned before, in 1922. And it became so posh that in the 20s, a Black-owned newspaper called the Afro wrote that Highland Park had become, quote unquote, as swanky and exclusive as Monte Carlo or a beach in Southampton, allowing in only the wealthiest elites of Baltimore and Washington's Black society, barring uninvited guests. So, I could do a whole thing on respectability politics here, but that's another presentation. So we just talked about the oldest, but by far one of the best known is Idlewild. Now, interestingly enough, Idlewild Resort was actually founded by white developers from Chicago in about the 1910s, and they sought to capitalize on this growing demand by the middle and upper class Black communities in the Midwest cities. So Idlewild, the great thing about Idlewild is that it was close to a lot of major Midwestern cities, Chicago, Detroit, and Indianapolis. So it had a wide range for Black vacationers to pull from Black vacationers. And they originally started selling the lots for under $25. It was a 25 by 100-foot lot, just big enough that you could put a little shack on. But trust me, those shacks had a lot of fun happening in them. And although, as I mentioned before, white developers officially established Idlewild, Black people quickly came in and took a lead in shaping it. In fact, the first person who moved there full time was a Black surgeon, and he brought his property in 1915. And he was the largest landowner at the time and also became a true leader in the community. And many, many famous Black people came and enjoyed Idlewild's time, such as W.E.B. Du Bois, Madam C.J. Walker, and even Louis Armstrong. And guess what? Idlewild caught on like fire. It was just so incredibly popular, especially after World War II, as the auto industry in Detroit really started going off. And it became so incredibly popular. And guess what? People were dedicated to having fun and just relishing. And I love to share these pictures because just look at the joy, look at just the relaxation and the really just deeply relatable images of people enjoying their time at Idlewild. And let me tell you one thing though, they came to relax, but they also came to see some amazing musical entertainment. In fact, Idlewild became known as the Summer Apollo of Michigan. I mean, look at these people. They are clearly having an outstanding time, to say the least. Here we have, what was it? from Barbara Hillard from Detroit, up, and Ruth Calloway from Gary, Indiana, Milwaukee. Yes, they were having a fun time. And these entertainment shows would draw more than 25,000 visitors on a given weekend. And we're not just talking any shows that would happen here. There were two of these major venues. There was the Flamingo Bar and the Paradise Bar. And not only that, but because Motown was so close, often the acts would go to Idlewild to try out there. And it was so popular that Idlewild was actually a stop on the Chitlin circuit, where people like Count Basie, Duke Ellington, Della Reese, the Four Tops, James Brown, they all performed at Idlewild. So this was such a unique and powerful experience where you could not only just, relax and have fun during the day, but also just enjoy this amazing nightlife. And one of the taglines for Idlewild, which was so powerful, it was called the R&R from racism, because it was all created by Black people for Black people. Now, since we've covered the East and the West, we have to do justice to, I'm sorry, the East and the Midwest. Now we get to the West Coast. And this is Val Verdes, which was also called the Black Palm Springs, or the Black Eden, as it was often also called. So this was an amazing. So Val Verde is about 45 minutes outside of LA city, and it's definitely part of LA County. And a lot of people don't realize that LA was probably one of the most segregated and racist communities or cities in the United States. In fact, there were redlining policies throughout LA County that were held up until the 1970s. In fact, I could tell another story about how my dad, we lived in LA for a while, and we wanted to buy property in Malibu on the beach. And the woman, my dad was like, I will pay. I've got the money. It's great. Let's do this. And the woman would not even give him the time of day. And when she asked, it was because, well, you're Black. I don't think your people should own this type of property. This property is too good for you. And this was, I want you to know, 1976 in LA, in Malibu. So you have to understand, because it was near LA, it does have a little bit of that Black celebrity magic going on here, because some of the earliest investors were Black actors, and they wanted to create Val Verdes in the shape of Palm Springs, but have it be this pioneering experience to create a peaceful recreational spot for Black people, because nothing like it existed that was where people could enjoy their time. So what did they do? They built this amazing, amazing place. And if you can see in this picture, there's this huge pool, and that was so incredibly powerful, that huge Olympic-sized pool. You have to understand that there were no other pools available in LA County. There were two pools available in LA County before 1964, and they were open one day a month to Black people. So having this huge pool was extraordinary. And you could see here, they were really trying to just get across the beauty of it. And they even feature that pool in their, what do you call it? Brochures going out there, because it was such a powerful, enticing piece for the Black community. And when I mentioned the magic of all of the, celebrities, the Black celebrities all came to Val Verde. Hattie McDaniel, she was actually at the groundbreaking of that pool. We have Jangles off in the top hat, and a young James Earl Jones. He raised horses there, and even was part of the church congregation, with a preview of the play he put on called Robeson. I mean, you've got to give him respect for that. Also, a wonderful piece about this is that they had beauty contests, and these beauty contests at Val Verde were so well known. And the thing that they focused on a lot was this idea of they would tell young women, you don't have to be beautiful in the usually accepted way. Read white looking. For girls will be judged for Negroid type. So they were relishing a really concept of Black beauty, which, as we know, is very powerful and important in the Black community. In fact, we have here a picture of Florence LaRue, and she later became a member of Fifth Dimension and was crowned Miss Valverde one year. The other thing that's really important to note here is that the Black communities, a lot of these Black resorts that had houses, these were places that created generational wealth in the Black community. And what I mean by that is owning a house and having a parent that owns a house and continuing to, incorporate and increase your funds and your finances as a family is huge. And that was a large forgotten piece for many people. But having that second house in a resort town like this, that is a truly amazing thing to have and to offer. And it really was a huge part of what being, how Black people were able to create more financial stability. And that is a really important piece that I just want to consider as we look at these Black resorts where you could, in particular, own your own home as part of them, such as the three that I've mentioned so far. So I've mentioned that higher level, the upper middle class Black Americans, but oftentimes, what if you just want to go to the beach one day, right? What if you can't afford a lovely house or go for a week to a fancy Black resort? Sometimes you just have one day off a week and you wanted to just get to the beach. And yes, there were many, many, many white only beaches, but there were some amazing Black beaches. And we're going to focus on a few here. The first one we're going to focus on happens to do with this beautiful couple here. These are my grandparents, and the beach we're going to talk about next was where they met. And it's incredibly important family history to know that they met in Atlantic City, and he saw her from, across the beach and came up, and it was just part of my heritage and a really beautiful story that we often talk about. And you think about this beautiful story and the beach, right? And what is the name of that exquisite beach where my grandparents first met and fell in love and was part of their courtship? Chicken Bone Beach. Yeah, that's the name of this very special beach. And I'm going to talk to you about that name and also about Atlantic City. So one of the wonderful things here is I'm sure you all know Atlantic City. Maybe you even visited it. Maybe you've heard about it from Boardwalk Empire, but it was an incredibly popular tourist town known for its beautiful beaches and casinos, even since the early 1900s. And it was especially known for extremely fancy hotels. And you can kind of see in the back this like pier. It was known as the $1 Million Pier. And all of these exquisite beaches and all these people, they're all white. And this amazing $1 Million Pier was patrolled so that no Black people came over and mingled with the white people. Because any Black person that was found on these beaches or on $1 Million Pier would be forcibly ejected from the site, with the exception of one place, and that's Chicken Bone Beach, which was literally just out of sight from the farthest place that you could look on from the $1 Million Pier. So the reason Chicken Bone Beach, well, it came because Black people were not allowed into a lot of the different restaurants. And so what did they do? They brought food themselves, and chicken is a remarkably sturdy meat that does not go bad easily. So it was considered the best type of food that could last longer in the heat. And that's where they got the name Chicken Bone Beach, because the seagulls would often pull out the chicken bones from the sand. And who was going to them? It was a lot of the Black servants, and this is gonna be a trend that we will continue to see at a lot of very popular, vacation spots. The, Black servants that waited on the white, tourists on their time off, they wanted a place to go. And they went. They had the best times at these beautiful beaches, making memories. And I always share these photos because I just need you guys to see just how happy and how wonderful and how not unique this is, and how it is truly a side that people often don't think about. But yes, people were there. And also, just like you saw at Idlewild or a lot of other places, there was a desire to have fun once, the beach, once the got too cold to be on the beach or the sun went down, they could then go to some amazing clubs, especially Club Harlem. And this Club Harlem was located in on Kentucky Avenue in Atlantic City, which was the Black section of town. And Club Harlem had amazing Black performers that once they finished singing at the larger fancy white clubs, would then head over to Club Harlem for a late night set. And also, because those white only beaches included, meaning that Black stars couldn't go, they ended up coming to Chicken Bone Beach too. And you can see here a very sassy Sammy Davis Jr. filling what looks like, or maybe he's popping a bottle of beer or champagne for some lovely ladies. So the last place that I'm going to talk about, the last beach, is one that I think has gotten a lot of notoriety recently, and that is Bruce's Beach. I'm sure many people here have heard about it. And it was started by Charles and Willa Bruce, this beautiful couple who were part of that Great Migration, but instead of going north, they went west. And they fell in love with a little piece of land that they bought, and they decided to open a seaside resort and called it Bruce's Lodge. And the beach in front of it was called Bruce's Beach, of course. And it welcomed Black beachgoers all over LA and beyond. And unfortunately, not everybody liked it. In fact, as I mentioned before, that LA has a history of I guess you could, a history of racial segregation. Tensions grew very high around Bruce's Beach. In fact, um, many, in fact, I think one of the things that was really rough is that local white real estate agents actually prompted a petition. They created a petition to shut down the Bruce's Beach and Bruce's Resort, even though there is nothing wrong with it. The only problem was that it was Black. And they were starting, remember the Black codes or the Jim Crow laws that were specifically guided at keeping Blacks from living their lives? Uh, white police began to just walk up and down this area, and anybody who was in a swimsuit walking to their car or walking away would immediately get a very high ticket that would make them not want to, come back. Even the NAACP organized a swim-in 1927 for Bruce's Beach, and unfortunately, they all went to jail. It was only until, whoops, sorry there, I went one too early. But basically, in a nutshell, they shut down Bruce's Beach. I think it was in 1927, they shut it down right after the NAACP piece closed. And the Bruces left LA, never to return. So the next slide, which I sort of, maybe you've heard of, the Inkwell, it's actually part of Oaks Bluff and Martha's Vineyard. This one is very, very important to me because this is where my family used to vacation back east during my childhood. The name the Inkwell it was a derogatory term that white people gave the beach because it refers to the skin color of the beachgoers. Later, people had sort of made a joke saying it's for writers go there. It was never called after Black people, but that is really not the case. You might have heard of it from this amazing movie called The Inkwell. And The Inkwell was actually, it's a great film, and Trey Ellis helped write it. And he was a family, or he is a family friend, and we actually took him to Martha's Vineyard. And part of that book is inspired by our family jaunts there. So, like Chicken Bone Beach, this community, there was a community of Black people on Cape Cod and in Martha's Vineyard who were the servants of the higher houses and other resorts in Martha's Vineyard. And they had this one beach that was there. And remember how it said Oaks Bluffs? Oaks Bluffs is very windy. It's not considered the best beach there, but it's still an amazing beach. And in 1912, Charles Shearer, who was the son of an enslaved person and an enslaver, he opened the first Black inn on Martha's Vineyard in Oaks Bluff. And this was funnily enough where there weren't that many vacationers, but it began to catch on, especially in the 1920s. In fact, it became so popular that many other Black residents at Oaks Bluffs, they were opening up their own homes, even just like a spare bedroom for visitors to make some extra money. And during the Harlem Renaissance, it was one of the other close beaches around, and Black people flourished. They loved coming here, and we're enjoying all of the amazing just reasons why anybody goes to Martha's Vineyard. It's beautiful, it's temperate, it's wonderful. And the great thing about it is that it continues. And I love this photo here from Oaks Bluffs. Just again, I keep saying that I share these photos because there are so few. I remember when I was doing the search for images on Google, I had to go like 3 or 4 pages deep of Google images before I came across a single one with a person of color on it. You know what they always say, like, you can hide a dead body on the second page of Google. So I think it's really important to share these beautiful pictures and remind you that there was a ton of joy. There was a ton of fun and relaxation and things that made life truly amazing. So I think one of the just things that I want to think about, or think I'm sure people have thought about, is where are they now? Are people going to these resorts? Well, things changed because of the civil rights movement. And it was an amazing thing because were Black people still going to them? No, it's because of this, the civil rights movement. Because when, oh, that was interesting. So in 1964, when President Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act, in theory, ending segregation, suddenly Black people had all of these options of places to go, right? Albeit many of them would not allow Black people to still visit, but it was an opening. And every year it cracked more open and more open. And as Black people traveled more, they realized that there were other more amazing places that they could go to, that were maybe better kept or more interesting to them than the Black resorts. So you're probably thinking to yourself, where are those Black resorts now? What's going on? Well, it's not great. In some cases, this is Idlewild today. By the end of the 1960s, most of the Black residents had already abandoned or sold their properties. And if they didn't sell them, they simply stopped visiting. But don't worry, there is an association and there's a lot of interest in bringing back this as a historical monument. It is incredibly important that this happens, and I know a lot of people are showing interest in it. Highland Beach is still thriving as a Black community. It's 53% Black and still welcomes thousands, tens of thousands of Black vacationers every year. And this is a little nice note about, you've probably heard of Magic of Bruce's Beach. Well, in July of 2022, the LA County Board of Supervisors officially returned Bruce's Beach to legal heirs of Charles and Willa Bruce. and they ended up selling it for $20 million. And to me, that is a perfect example of Black joy and really taking advantage of it as they should. Remember when I was talking about that wealth, inheritance, and continuing? This is part of it. And it's a really beautiful thing that we're able to see. And this is Val Verde today. Because of the 1994 Northridge earthquake, it wrecked a lot of the town and damaged many of the original structures, which already in the 70s were starting to go downhill. But in 1996, that celebrated pool was actually replaced with a new one, and they brought picnic tables, which you can see here. And so every now and then you will find in the at a good estate sale, maybe a Val Verde ashtray or something along those lines. Every now and then you can find those pieces. And this is Chicken Bone Beach today during a wonderful annual event called Black Girl Beach Day. It started in 2017 and it's still thriving. Chicken Bone Beach is still bringing in tens of thousands of Black vacationers every year. And my beloved Inkwell is still hopping. Oaks Bluff, you can see here we have one of its more popular or famous residents or vacationers, Barack Obama. He still goes there. And that's pretty powerful, to say the least. In fact, a lot of famous Black people still vacation at Oaks Bluff, like Henry Louis Gates Jr., Maya Angelou, excuse me, and a very famous comedian went there who raised his daughters in Berkeley. And he brought his daughters and his mother and family to Oaks Bluff for a vacation. And the daughters were amazed. They just truly could not believe how many people looked like them and were in one space, and how they felt freer and more at peace than they did even in such a liberal town as Berkeley is known for. And so, with that idea, it just reminds me that there is still power in Black spaces. There is still a need for them. And there is, most importantly, a need to tell this type of history because, as I mentioned before, these things, these places that seem like they'd be around forever, go away, right? And they end up being nothing more than stories told, you know, at the kitchen table during other vacations with family while the children go to sleep. And these type of stories are so important. And this is why we have to talk about these things. These stories matter. So thank you so much for taking the time to listen to me on this. And I know we have some questions, and I hope I kept it. Yes, I kept it to the if just under 15 minutes. So thank you all so much.
Excellent job, Leslie. I know you can't hear them, but the audience is applauding and cheering. That was great and very good job on the time. Very nice. All right, we do have a couple questions in the chat. So I will start with people were curious about where you found the photos. You did talk a little bit about buried in Google, but did you find a lot of them in like going to archives or family photos of people that you knew? Where did you find these amazing photos?
I did rely on some family photos. I relied a lot on Pinterest. And oh gosh, there was one archive. I can't remember. It wasn't the Smithsonian. It was someplace else. But I mean, it does take a lot of time, and they are harder to find
Yeah.
than one would think. And the quality of them, as you saw, some of them were scratched because clearly they were, in somebody's drawer for years and they just decided to, you know, put them digitally there.
Yeah, I'm sure Pinterest was a rabbit hole of, oh, one more. Um, there was a question about if white people could go to the resorts, as well as other minorities or people of color that may not have been Black? What was the acceptance or interest, I guess?
Well, I will say that there were Asian resorts as well. I did not cover them. I did mention Jewish resorts. Uh, to be honest, I think white people could attend some of the events, but you have to understand, I doubt that any white person would want to go to them at that time because of the just racial differences. And there were so many other options there. It probably wasn't even something that they would consider. But as I mentioned, even the performers, the Black performers that would go to a lot of those resorts, they were also going to the white resort. So there was really no reason for, any white person to go there, even though I totally understand that question.
Yeah. Did you find anything about mixed race couples uh, or families attending, or does that kind of fall under the last answer that you gave?
Yeah, I, mixed race families have always, the number of mixed race families definitely have grown since, the end of segregation. But
Hmm.
oftentimes there are many, I hate to say, but there are actually many stories of people that were white that passed as Black, um, and got in that way. I can imagine because I know that there have been many stories. I've heard that story many times, like, oh, she just, quote unquote, pretended she was Black to get in.
Mm, okay. Um, there are quite a few requests slash questions about if this information is going to be turned into a book. And I know that was a question when I saw you do this presentation. There was a very adamant person in the back that insisted that you needed to put this into a book. And I have to say, I agree with them. Any any more movement on that front or
Oh
thoughts?
my stars, uh, it is absolutely fascinating, but I know that there are a couple of books on Idlewild already that exist. I don't know if there are like an overarching look at books or stories. I'll definitely have to think about that, but thank you.
In your spare time,
That's right, in my
writing a
spare
book
time.
sounds but like you said, these are great stories, and getting to document them, I'm sure will be very valuable. Are you still collecting stories when you do the presentations? Does
You
it
know,
bring up more stories?
that is such a great question, and it's actually something that I really should do because I hate to say it, a lot of the people that went to these, wonderful resorts are dying or no longer are around. And
Hmm.
when I talked about like picking up things at estate sales, that I meant it. Like people are dying, and these pieces of ephemera are just ending up in the trash because people don't know what they are. So hopefully, everybody here who has attended now knows these things and can keep an eye for any telltale signs.
Yes, we're all your deputy researchers for this now. Let's see, there was a comment. That's a lot of white folks behind my cousin Obama. Who typically frequents that resort now, the Martha Vineyard one?
So Oaks Bluff is still, it's a town similar to Highland Park in a lot of ways. Um, and, it's more like a Black community, or an area. And I'm sure he was, just probably at like the Black Dog Inn in that picture in Martha's Vineyard, which is a very popular, eating place. And I love that you were like, my cousin Obama, Mary Evans, you are a treasure. And I love that.
Um, there is a comment about somebody in 1969, their summer job in Orange County. They went to surf at the beach. And the folks there seemed to be fairly mixed. Not too many blacks, but there were Mexican Americans and various Asian. Maybe local protests were effective by that time. Thought that returned to Albuquerque, which had a relatively liberal ethnic relations, perhaps due to the Hispanic Anglo intermarriage. So that's interesting. Your beach experience. Pete, if you want to come off of mute, I'm happy to make that happen. Let's see. I'll ask you if you want to unmute, and then you can make the call.
Hi. Yes, it was a had a six day a week graveyard shift factory job making batteries, which was pre-OSHA too. A lot of molten lead and acid in the air. It was just a nightmare, but it paid pretty well. Plus, I had to join the Teamsters Union. It was not as good as a nice Brotherhood of Electric Workers union job I had in Massachusetts the previous summer. But didn't want to pass up the chance to go to Southern California since it was all the rage at that time. And yeah, sometimes I just go out there and go to sleep since I just finished off a graveyard shift and grab a beer or something. But there'll be the early morning surfers will be out there, and then a lot of retired people just kind of walking up and down the beach, that kind of thing. But it was definitely kind of early on, yeah. But that's I did yeah. I mean, it was a pretty divided city in a lot of ways, but people seemed to mix fairly well in the public sphere. Yeah.
Yeah, totally. I do agree with that. I grew up, I was born in Santa Monica, and
Oh yeah.
my
I had
memory
an
is,
uncle that lived there. Yeah.
oh, really? Yeah. I mean, Santa Monica and Malibu are very different than they
Yeah.
are.
I think Santa Monica is an independent city.
Yeah, totally. It was not fancy. It could, my dad could afford a 3-bedroom house there, where he couldn't in other areas of LA.
It was pretty middle class at that time.
Totally, totally. Yeah. And my dad, we lived in a not segregated area. However, there were still zoning laws. There were still a lot of things that, you know, made a lot of American cities up into the 70s really tough for Black people to live and engage in, find the best education. I always think about, I lived in Boulder, Colorado, and Boulder was literally a segregated town until 1970 on the
Hmm.
dot. It was very much, and it still is a predominantly white town, even though it had a Black mayor and does have a Black community.
Awesome. Brian has asked to be unmuted to ask a question. So go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, Emily, and thank you, Leslie, for your presentation. It's just remarkable, really, really good. I was really intrigued by one slide you put up there that said, I think it was the one from Atlantic City about not we cater to the white trade only, and also excluded white trade excluded Mexicans and and there was somebody else too, Mexicans and another racial group, which I would consider to be white, but I guess they didn't make the grade. I'm from Canada, and way back, I'm talking in the 1800s, the Irish were subject to that same thing. It would be no dogs or Irish in a restaurant or some kind of place like that. Do you know, just offhand, I know that's not what you've been researching, but did Mexicans and other racialized groups like that have their own places to go as well? Or how common was that no Mexicans, even though I thought they were white?
Yeah, no, it was definitely, I mean, especially in places like Texas as well as LA, there was a lot of racial frustration, I guess, for people who weren't white, classically white. And as, I know Irish did, and even in towns, I keep thinking about like, there was often an Irish community or an Italian section of town or an Irish section of town, or in many different cities, even in the city I'm in right now, which is a suburb of California, a town called Alameda. I live in the West End that was known as the Italian section of town. And this is a suburb of, like, at the time it was less than 50,000 people. You know, it's really, wow.
Well, immigrants tended to cluster, especially during the Great Migration of the late 19th century,
Exactly.
especially from Eastern Europe, if they were Jewish and or Catholic. So therefore, you had Protestants, Lithuanians, Slovaks, et cetera, in Chicago, Cleveland, Buffalo, especially the Rust Belt towns, and down into, say, Omaha and down toward St. Louis and so forth. That not uncommon. I knew an Irish guy who was from Omaha, and he described exactly that thing. Their houses were near the stockyards.
Totally. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I saw Sarah Rothschild had a Vassar t-shirt. Go Vassar. I won.
My nephew went there.
Oh, great.
All right. Well, I think we have time for one more question. Nancy asks, Mackenzie Beach, maybe also known as Magnolia Beach, which is now in ruins in Palsy Island, South Carolina. Are you familiar with it, or
Oh, I'm not, but that sounds amazing. Not amazing, but a heartbreaking story that I'm sure there are many of. And that's the thing that really sort of fascinated me, is that there are so many of these beaches that I just don't even know about anymore. And that's really interesting. Mackenzie Beach, also known as Magnolia in Ruins. Wow, I have not heard of it. Thank you for that. I'm going to make note of that to include, should I do that book. But I have to say I probably won't, only because of copywriting of images and what have you.
That's true. Yes. All right. Well, maybe you could write something for our journal, so at least it is documented in some way, shape, or form, even if it's an abbreviated version of it. We'll connect you with Doug, and maybe you can get something into our journal.
I love it.
All right. Last call for any questions. There's lots of kudos and thanks and appreciation and many compliments in the chat that you'll have to check out after we're done. No one else has anything else. Oh, wait, hold on. Let me go back to my script that Brian prepared for me. All right. Well, of course, we want to thank Leslie for doing this presentation for us. I'm very grateful. We've been working on this for a while, since I saw her do the presentation this summer, and I'm so glad it came together. I know my SCA family would appreciate all of this information and the photos and the stories, and getting to see what we love so much through a different lens. So thank you very much. I would also like to remind everybody about next month's presentation on Wednesday, March 20th at the 8 o'clock Eastern / 5 o'clock Pacific. We will be joined by Cindy Licious, who will take us on a tour of the world's most seductive architectural wonders, and we'll hear about the women who made these fantasies into realities. SCA members will be receiving the relevant details and registration for this talk by email. You may have already received it because we got delayed on time a little bit, but so check your emails, and you can also go onto our website, sca-roadside.org, and register through there. So thank you very much to all of you for spending your time with us this evening, and expect an email shortly inviting you to join the SCA if you're not already a member. And then you too can enjoy all of these benefits of membership. So we're going to wrap this up, and the recording will be available on the website in a few days if you want to tell all your friends about what they missed, and they'll be able to catch up on it soon enough. All right. Thank you very much. Everybody have a wonderful evening. Sorry, Leslie, you
Oh,
go.
I was just saying, thank you so much. SCA Roadside is such an amazing, amazing community and organization. I personally look forward to getting to know and watch other people's videos and presentations. So thank you so much for everybody that came. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. All right. Good night, everybody.
Night. Thank you.
Hey.